The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. We're coming to you live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone TV, and on shortwave from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Our toll-free number is 1-877-528-8255. That's toll-free throughout the U.S., Canada, Alaska, and Hawaii at 1-877-528-8255. On MSN Messenger, you can always chat with us here in our studios by simply going to, you ready for this? talkstarradio@hotmail.com, and our two websites, www.xzoneradio.com and www.xzonetv.com. Now, my guest, who was supposed to be with me right now, is Ralph Ellis. Unfortunately, we're having problems getting a clear line over to the United Kingdom. We'll keep on trying, and as soon as we are able to get Ralph on the phone, we will bring him on. As we've been talking about, this is the Valentine's Day week. We have Valentine's coming up very shortly. So don't forget, guys, buy the card. Make sure you've got one for the lady in your life, your mom, and any sweet children that you have that you'd like to really show them that Dad really cares. And the same goes for you, Mom. Don't forget Dad. Now, we talk about dreams here on the X-Zone, and we've taken an in-depth look at dreams. But one of the questions that comes up very often is, what do dreams mean, and what do we dream about? Well, the most common sex dream involves sex followed by flirting, kissing fantasies. 4% of sex dreams among men and women result in the waking hours, and it seems that 47% of all dreams that we have are sexual. And then we've also checked into the best part-time job you've ever had, and according to CareerBuilder.com, here are some of the great ones. Pharmacy technician with an average salary of $12.32 an hour. A tax preparer. You know, the people who prepare your taxes, are you ready for this? Their average salary is $32.21 an hour. A dental assistant has an average salary of $14.53 an hour. Personal care and personal home aid, they have an average salary of $8.45 an hour. A receptionist, their average salary is $11.01 an hour. And a clerical library assistant, they earn an average of $10.40 an hour. I just got word from our good friend Superman at Master Control that we have Ralph Ellis on the phone, but we're not going to be bringing him on until after the first break. So see, this is why I call this guy the Superman, because he can make things happen where many people can't. Top 5 gifts not to get your Valentine. Number 1, something contagious. Number 2, a dozen dried roses from last year. Yeah, I tried that once. It didn't work. A heart-shaped candy. A heart-shaped oil change kit. Candy canes and a red bathroom scale. Wouldn't work here either. Can your eyes get any bigger? Let me see. No, I don't understand what that's all about, guys. You'll have to give me some other information here. Ralph Ellis is going to be with us. That is for sure on the other side of this break. We're going to be talking about the history that they don't want you to know, and how scientific community, archaeologists, and theology have been feeding you misinformation. We're also going to be talking to Ralph about his new book that is coming out. and it promises to be another great one. 1-877-528-8255 is toll-free. My name is Rob McConnell, and when we return from this 2-minute break, Ralph Ellis will be joining us. And like I said, we're going to be talking about history. The history that people don't want you to know about. I've said this many, many times, that history is one of the biggest lies that our children are being taught. History was written by the conqueror, and 95% of the time, it's wrong. For example, Christopher Columbus, he did not discover America. We'll be back on.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits, and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best.
Hi, this is Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout, here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. I would like to invite all of our listeners to the second annual Para-Unity Conference, January 27th through the 29th in Fellsmere, Florida. We have some exciting speakers, including Brian Cano from The Haunted Collector, author Andrea Perrin, whose book inspired the hit movie The Conjuring, and our own Rob McConnell. There are events for the public as well as opportunities for paranormal teams to come together to share information. We also have opportunities for our guests to participate in some investigations of Fellsmere's most haunted locations. Check out my website at www.paranormalstakeout.com or www.paranormalfbi.com for times and details. Hope to see you there.
Are you interested in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, or psychic phenomenon? Join me, Tim Bartley, co-host of Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, coming mid-January 2017 to the XZBN. We will channel spirits live and talk to them, revealing all kinds of amazing information. Spiritual attachments will be found and removed on the show, and so much more. To find out when you can listen to Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, visit www.xzbn.net for listeners on both sides of the veil.
Welcome back, everyone. Ralph Ellis is our special guest this hour, and Ralph was trained as a in mineral surveying and computer science, but after several years in the industry, he decided to retrain as a pilot. Ralph is now working as an airline captain serving international flights out of Britain. However, history and religion have always been Ralph's primary passion, and the many and varied short stays across the world were always put to good use in research and writing. Ralph has always had a distinctly lateral, open-minded view on history and religion, which has allowed his research to proceed unhindered by historical preconceptions and doctrinal dogma. A central tenet of his research and writing has been to assume that the authorities, but the historical or religious, have always been economically and treated the truth as an economic factor. A premise that assumes that there are still historical secrets to be unearthed. However, upon starting this literary crusade, it never occurred to Ralph that there would be so many secrets, and that the truths of man's ancient past would be so radically different, on what we are normally taught. And Ralph Ellis, welcome back to the X Zone. Great having you with us, Ralph. How have you been?
Very well, thanks, Rob. Thanks very much for having me back.
It's great, Ralph. I'm just going over the notes that we have here. Some of the topics that you and I have talked about in the past are the Israelite exodus from Egypt. We've talked about the biblical Jacob, who was actually a pharaoh. We've talked about Mount Sinai was the Great Pyramid, which makes a lot of sense. We talked about most of the Bible comes from old Egyptian texts. We talked about Adam and Eve were Pharaoh Akhenaton and Nefertiti. Are you still shocking the world with your books and discoveries?
The list goes on and on, doesn't it?
My goodness, it's so refreshing to talk to someone who's not afraid to let the truth out.
History is not quite as we know it, is it?
No, it's...
Yes, unfortunately, the historical truth still seems to be that there still seems to be mysteries still to be solved. I've probably got another 2 books in me. I've got one that's coming out this April, March or April, depending on when I get it finished. And that's going to be an interesting one. This is quite an epic, this one. I've got to 600 pages on this one. So
wow.
It's twice as thick as any of my other books, so I hope I haven't overdone it. But anyway, this one is King Jesus, and the subtitle is From Camelos to Camelot. So this is going to be an interesting title, because Camelos was Egypt, of course. This is where I believe that the Hyksos Israelites came from. This is where I believe that Jesus' heritage came from as well. So from Camelos to Camelot. So, so we go all the way from Egypt to England and to the court of King Arthur.
Now, what's the connection between Jesus and the court of King Arthur?
Well, because I think Jesus was King Arthur.
Ah.
Now, this is an interesting one, because everyone has their own preconception of who King Arthur is, or was, should I say. But, of course, the texts are very nebulous. They don't actually say what we understand King Arthur to be. We all think of him, traditionally we used to think of him as sort of a 12th, 13th century monarch, but of course that's wrong. And nowadays everyone thinks of him as being a Dark Ages monarch, so we're talking about the 6th century AD or something like that. But the texts themselves are confused. They're very confused, in fact. There are many references to the 6th century AD, but there are also quite a number of references to the 1st century AD. So the texts don't quite actually know where to put King Arthur. Was he supposed to be Dark Ages, or was he supposed to be 1st century? And I get the impression, having looked through all of the original Grail texts, this is from the Vulgate cycle, which is an enormous, great compendium of Arthur stories. It just struck me that the original story was most probably a 1st century story, and it's been slipped back into the 6th century in order to divorce it from its original roots, because its original roots are quite heretical, basically.
Really?
Yes, because if you understand that this guy, King Arthur, was actually King Jesus, quite a lot of the story actually changes. So it's been quite a roller coaster ride, actually. I didn't set off with this intention. This book has just sort of grown exponentially when it shouldn't have done. I set off looking for the origins of Saul, who we know as Paul normally, trying to prove who he was in the historical record, because all of these guys are missing, of course, from the historical record. All of these famous people in the Bible all seem to be missing somehow.
How can that happen?
Yes, it's funny, isn't it? Every single one. Saul was another of these missing people, and yet he is pivotal, of course, to Christianity, because he is the guy who created Christianity. As probably everyone knows, Christianity doesn't have anything really to do with Jesus at all. It was the creation of Saul, or St. Paul. It was his church that was the victor in the battles, as it were. There were two sort of rival churches. There was the Church of Jesus and the Church of Saul. and it was the Church of Saul that won, and that's the church that we know as Christianity. So Christianity is not really the Church of Jesus at all.
How is it that these people cannot exist in historical records? Does this mean that
this is a great problem? I mean, these people were. I mean, the inference is given quite often when we go to RE lectures, as children and whatever, that all of this was done by nobodies, by carpenters, by just simple people. But of course, that's just obviously not true. You only have to glance through the books to realize that these people were influential. The people they were always talking to were the governors and the kings and all the rest of it. These were influential people, and therefore they should have left their mark in the historical record. And then the question is, of course, why did not they actually leave their mark in the historical record? Well, it's always been my premise that they did, that they are there. You just have to understand where they are and who they are. And so there's been one or two name changes going on.
Did they use pen names because they didn't want their true identity to be known?
Yes. I'm not sure that they did themselves, although definitely Saul did, because, Saul changed his name to St. Paul, so we know there was a lot of name changing going on. But I think a lot of the name changing happened afterwards, that certain people found it convenient to use pen names instead of real names. And another thing that they tended to do was use the same name in a different language. And that's a very good way of covering things up. So you'll find that one scribe was using the Greek version of the name, and another scribe was using the Aramaic. And then you don't know that these are actually the same person, because it appears like they've got a different name, but it's not the same name.
Every time you and I finish a conversation here on the X-Zone, I have more questions. Like you just open up question after question after question. And, that's what I love about you and your books. They make you think.
Yes. Well, I do so hope that is true, because that's the whole goal, isn't it? We need to open our eyes and be able to see through the propaganda that we've been given, basically. And a lot of it, I believe, is propaganda, because some of it is becoming so obvious to me now as a scholar of theology, I can almost say, because I've been studying this for so long, that anyone who is like me, who has been deeply imbibed in theology, should have seen what I've seen. So all of these biblical scholars that are sort of knocking around the world should have seen the same information. So why are they not seeing the same results as me? So there is a bit of a conspiracy here that people are turning a blind eye because what they're finding conflicts with their position, because obviously most theologians are actually people of the church. And so they're finding information that they don't really want to find, and I think they're just sort of gently shuffling on and not telling us about it, because it's deeply troubling to them.
But isn't that contrary to what they want us to do? They want us to act? Don't they want us to be honest?
Well, yes, but, if you've been brought up and your whole position in society is dependent on the belief in this person, being a carpenter and a gardener, all this sort of business, and then you do your research and you find that is actually not actually true, well, what do you do about it? Because if you actually go public with what you found, you'll probably lose your job, you lose your position, you lose your life. That's deeply troubling for some people. Apart from the theological difficulty, if you deeply believe this, suddenly you find it's not true, that is another problem. But it seems quite obvious to me. I mean, one of the big revelations I've had recently is reading the Talmud. Now, the Talmud is an awful book to go through. The Talmud is the jottings of the Jewish priesthood, basically. They went through the Old Testament looking for future predictions and laws of the land, or like current law. The law of the land came from biblical precedent. So they were looking back through the Old Testament for biblical precedent.
Ralph, we have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Ralph Ellis is our very special guest. His website, Exonation, great books. These books make you think. www.edfu-books.com. That's www.edfu-books.com. Books to make you think. They'll open up your mind, and you'll read, and you'll say, you got to be kidding. Why haven't we been told this before? Ralph Ellis is telling you now. And once again, www.edfu-books.com. We'll be back after the news. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
We all desire health, happiness, and fulfillment, but often get in our own way. Repeated patterns that leave us out of control can keep us feeling powerless, frustrated, and unable to move forward in spite of our best efforts. Unconscious patterning disconnects us from our gifts, often destroying the very thing we seek. But there is an answer. We can take charge of our destiny and heal the trauma of our history. Shamanism is an effective ancient modality that can reconnect us with our true selves, empower the creation of our dreams, and return us to health and balance. Cody Alexander is a certified shamanic practitioner and teacher with 11 years' experience. Email healingpathways33@gmail.com or visit codyalexander.net to schedule a long-distance shamanic session today.
Ralph Ellis is our very special guest this hour, Exonation. His website is www.edfu-books.com. Ralph, don't the scientists, don't the archaeologists, don't the philosophers and the theologians believe that we can actually handle the truth and that we deserve to know the truth?
Well, perhaps, I don't know. But the trouble is, if we get the entire truth, it rather undermines the whole establishment of the church. The church is based on a framework, an establishment that they've made, which says certain truths. And if you take those truths away, it rather undermines the whole edifice, doesn't it? And I suppose they're all afraid that the whole edifice will fall down if you undermine those truths.
Well, maybe that's what the great apocalypse is not the fall or the destruction of the world. Maybe it's the
destruction of the church. Yeah.
Yes.
You might well be right on that. I don't know. Just before the break, we were talking about the Jewish Talmud.
Yes, we were.
The Talmud is a huge, great compendium of books. And it quite clearly says that Jesus was high priest of Jerusalem. And so does actually Hebrews from the back of the Bible also says that Jesus was the high priest of Jerusalem. Well, that's quite a change from our normal perceptions.
Yes.
That obviously the high priest was the most important person within society. It also says that he was a Nazarene, not that he came from Nazareth. He was a Nazarene, which was a particular sect. And it's also quite clear from the Talmud that he was connected, his family were connected to very wealthy people like Simon Boethus, who were, the richest people in Jerusalem and Judea. And this is where we come down to this different story, because, of course, the titles that we give this chap, he was called Christ and he was called Messiah. And we put special connotations onto those titles. But those titles actually only mean king. That's what they basically mean. So when we say Jesus Christ, what we're actually saying is King Jesus. And that's why I've chosen the title that I have for my book. So here we have a monarch. We don't have a pauper and a carpenter. We have a monarch, King Jesus. And this is where the story changes, because, monarchs getting involved in power play. That's their position. And this particular monarch got into a bit of an argument with the Roman forces who were in Judea at the time, of course. And it sort of transpires that the whole of this argument, the whole of the New Testament argument that was going on, was over taxes. This is why we get this reference, render unto Caesar, what is Caesar's and all this sort of business. And why Jesus was always, lambasted for mixing with tax collectors and sinners, because this was a huge, great tax argument, and it resulted in the Jewish revolt. And this is where my story parts company with traditional Christianity completely, because
Now, Ralph, I was just going to ask you, in your quest for the truth, have you found any reference to Jesus in history or in the record of being king?
Yes, but it depends on who you think he is. Now, I think he was actually Jesus of Gamala, because, of course, in these books, this history of the first century, there are quite a number of Jesuses running around.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them seem remarkably similar to the Jesus we know. The one that I concentrate on is Jesus of Gamala, who was known as he was a leader of a band of rebel fishermen. Now, who in that era could be a leader of a band of rebel fishermen?
And what would a band of rebel fishermen do?
Yes, precisely. Why do we have a band of rebel mariners who go around, and they were well armed. They had 600 rebels under his command.
Wouldn't they be called pirates?
Well, there's not many seas around there. I mean, we're talking about around Galilee, so we're only talking about 600 on the Sea of Galilee here.
Yeah.
So it's quite obvious to me that this was the biblical Jesus. And this reference to fishermen, of course, has got nothing to do with fishing. It's all about the zodiac. The big thing out there, of course, within these old religions, within the Nazarene religion, within traditional Judaism, in fact, was the zodiac. It was all done about astrology. So if you look around the early synagogues, and they had a bit of it's another of these conundrums. They always pick these things, don't they? They were doing all this archaeology in Syria and Israel, and they uncovered 6 synagogues from a very early era, and they all had a zodiac on the floor. So we know that the zodiac was a key part of early Judaism. And so this reference to fishermen is all about the zodiac. It's about Pisces, because, of course, Pisces was the ruling constellation. It just came to the fore, so we had the turn of the great year in about AD 10, just when Jesus was born. So he was the first monarch of the new era of Pisces, and that's why he was known as the fisherman. In fact, actually, that's why he was known as the Lamb of God. So he was known as Aries, who then became the fisherman, the fisher of men. So he was born in Aries, but he grew up under the star sign of Pisces. Just for those those listeners who don't know about precession changes the constellation about every 2,200 years or so. And this is known as the Great Year. So every 2,200 years, the actual star sign changes, and about the turn of the first century, it changed from Aries into Pisces. This is why all of the Old Testament patriarchs were known as shepherds, and Jesus was known as the fisher of men because the star sign had changed into Pisces. And this is why in the Grail stories, of course, coming back to the King Arthur business that we're coming on to in the new book, this is why we have the legend of the Fisher King. The Fisher King was the king of Pisces again. It's the same story. And of course, Jesus was the fisher of men, and that's why he was known as the Fisher King. The Fisher King is another allusion to King Arthur, by the way. So it's all astrological. And if we understand it in that fashion and not in the traditional terms, it all starts to begin to make sense.
Yes.
Why do we have a line of Fisher Kings? Well, because it's the sign of Pisces. That's what it's all about.
So Jesus was in fact a king.
He was king. He was king.
So
Jesus.
he wasn't.
So
where does the poor carpenter come into play?
Well, the carpenter business. Well, there are several possibilities here. I mean, carpenter was an old Egyptian pharaonic title. So within Egypt, a lot of the pharaohs were called Setapenra, which means God's carpenter. Yes. So I think there's a bit of a play on the words with that old pharaonic title. But also, it doesn't say within the New Testament that Jesus was a carpenter. Again, this is another convenient mistranslation. What it says is that he was a tekton. And tekton actually means architect. You can still hear the basis of the word within the English. And the reason he was an architect was not because necessarily he was actually designing buildings, which he might have done actually as well, but the reason he was called an architect was because he was a mason. He belonged to the Masons. This is why we have the reference to an architect. And if you look through the New Testament and you read the raising of Lazarus, if you know that from the Bible,
yes,
the raising of Lazarus is a third-degree initiation. It's exactly the same. And so it's quite obvious that he was in a Masonic type sect, which was called the Nazarene sect. So, and that's why, of course, the God of the Masons is known as the architect of the universe, and this is why he was known as the architect, because he was supposed to be the son of God, as it were. So, he was a Mason, and it makes perfect sense, so we don't end up with a carpenter in his workshop. We end up with an architect, as in a speculative architect. We end up as a Mason who was actually a royal Mason, so he was both king and he was Grand Master as well.
So tell me, Ralph, based on your research, did Christ really die on the cross?
No, and there are several actually accounts of his crucifixion. Now this is where it gets interesting, because if you understand that Jesus was actually Jesus of Gamala, who was a very wealthy, influential person in that era, a prince, if not a king himself, then we come across this reference to the crucifixion. And it's very, very similar, in fact, to what we understand from the biblical crucifixion, except that the person who comes riding to the rescue was not Joseph of Arimathea, it was Josephus. So it's almost the same person who comes to the rescue, except he wasn't known as Joseph of Arimathea. He was Josephus, and Josephus was the first century historian who was the central player in the whole of this drama. And so, yes, he was crucified by the sounds of it. But as Josephus says, there were 3 people on the crosses, and he pleaded with the governor for these people to be taken down from the cross. Sound similar?
Yes.
And 2 of them died, and 1 survived. Now, he doesn't actually say who these particular people were, but the circumstances and the location and the date and everything just fits like a glove. This has to be Jesus of Gamala.
And that would explain why he was seen by his disciples for 40 days after.
He was taken down early, and he was given medical attention. That's what he says. And that's actually what it says in the Talmud as well. So, all of these scholars, of the Jewish scholars who have been poring through the Talmud should know this as well, because that's what it says in the Talmud. And that's why in the Talmud it says that Jesus was blind in one eye, had a dislocated shoulder, and was lame and couldn't walk. Well, of course, because he'd just been taken down from the cross. That's why. And so, yes, there was a crucifixion, but he was actually nursed back to life. And then we start going into the Grail legends, because what do you do with this rebel? So here we have, and this was all part of the Jewish rebellion, so this is why he was actually crucified. He was the leader of the Jewish rebels. And so as a leader, well, you take the justice of the victors. The victors were the Romans, and so he was crucified. But what do you do with this rebel? After the crucifixion, well, obviously the easiest thing would be to actually dispose of him. Mm-hmm. He's a dangerous rebel, let's dispose of him. That's the way things would normally work in this sort of era. But things were rather more complicated than that, because one of Jesus' great sponsors, who was, I believe, Berenice, who was the sister wife of Agrippa II, so the King Agrippa II of Judea, was one of the great supporters of the Nazarene, of the Church of Jesus. And as it happens, she became the lover of the brother of the emperor of Rome, Vespasian. So now the politics got rather difficult. And I've got no doubt that Berenice put an awful lot of pressure on the emperor of Rome, Vespasian, in order to have some sort of clemency. So here is a call for clemency for this political rebel who was called King Jesus Christ, because that's what the word means. Now, what do you do with him if you can't actually kill him because of this political pressure? Well, the answer is you send him into exile, into prison, as far away from Judea as you possibly can. So where in the Roman Empire is as far away from Judea as you can possibly get?
England.
And that's where he went. Because in this new scenario, all of these events don't take place in AD 30. So we've got another hurdle to overcome here. The Bible, as we know, seems to indicate that all of these events happened in AD 30. But it's quite clear if you read the history of this era that the event that it's talking about in AD 30 was actually the death of John the Baptist. It wasn't the death of Jesus. All of these events happened actually in AD 60, so we're talking about one generation further on.
Oh, so wait a sec. I'm starting to see something here. Weren't there 12 Knights of the Round Table?
Well, of course. Where did the 12 Knights of the Round Table come from?
Yeah.
It was King Arthur and the 12 disciples of the Round Table.
Exactly. Ralph, please stand by, sir. You and I have to take a commercial break. Interesting man, Mr. Ralph Ellis is, and we're also always so happy when he's able to join us. His website, www.edfu-books.com. My name's Rob McConnell, Ralph Ellis, and I will return on the other side of this break as we continue live and around the world right here on the Talkstar Radio Network.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
19 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today. www.soulbalancing.world.
Welcome back, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking all our guests tonight, Tanya Gabrielle, Tim Ward, and, of course, our very special guest this hour, Ralph Ellis. On tomorrow night's show, we have Amethyst joining us. We have Dr. Rand joining us, Richard P. Jackson, and Monique Chapman. That's tomorrow night here on the X-Zone. First of all, Ralph, thank you very much for getting up at this very early hour in the United Kingdom.
My pleasure.
And it's always great having you with us because, as I said, you always make me think when you're on. And I have to ask you this. All right, if Jesus was King Arthur, the 12 Knights of the Round Table, the Apostles, who was Mary Magdalene?
She was his queen, so she was Queen Mary Magdalene.
Now, if my memory serves me correct, the insignia of the Knights of the Round Table was a circle divided by 12 with a griffin clutching a cross.
Yes, and the Round Table itself comes straight from the Last Supper table. So if we go again into the Vulgate cycle and read the history of the table was supposed to be a reconstruction of the Last Supper table. So we have a direct allusion here to the Knights of the Round Table being the disciples of the Last Supper table. And so, you know, there is supposed to be a direct descent from one to the other. And so they are related, they are linked. This is all to do with the Jesus story. And all I'm saying is, yes, it is to do with the Jesus story. Yeah, it's Jesus himself. You know, and that's why this guy was supposed to be so special. This is why, you know, such a mythology arose about this guy.
Then would Merlin then be God?
Well, I think there were lots of creations that were added on. You know, right. Merlin was sort of invented by William of Malmesbury, I think. I'm not entirely sure that Merlin is a real person, but of course, Jesus was allied to the Magi. He was a Magi priest.
That's right.
And so a perfect allusion to the Magi would be someone like Merlin. You know, he does the same sort of thing. You know, these people were supposed to be, you know, adept astrologers. They were supposed to be magicians like Simon Magus. They were supposed to be able to do amazing things, miracles almost. But these were supposed to be magic miracles rather than necessarily spiritual.
Ralph, I can hardly wait till your new book comes out. Can we have you back on in April when your book is released?
Absolutely, yes. It should be April. In fact, in America, now let me think. It's at the publishers, at the printers now, so we should be late March, early April, yeah.
Look forward to having you back with us. Do me a favor, take care of yourself flying all over the world, and thank you very much for all the great mysteries that you're helping bring here to the X-Zone.
And you too, and thanks very much for having me on.
Nice talking to you, Ralph. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Ralph Ellis, what a gentleman. www.edfu-books.com. Well, that's it for tonight, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking my producer at Master Control, the one and only Superman. Thanks, Super, for keeping us up on those 3 satellites in the sky, Galaxy 4R, Telstar 7, Anglia 2, and now the rest of the world on TalkStarRadio.com streaming audio. To my wife and senior producer, Laura Rogers, thank you, sweetheart. Keith Friedman at Consolidated Streaming, thanks, buddy, for keeping our video feeds going. And to you, the X-Zone Nation, thank you for allowing us to be part of your day or night, no matter where you are on this great big world of ours.